Hi guys, good morning. Good morning. I hope all is well. Thanks for joining today to this second session of this training of firewall engineer certification. Thanks for joining guys. We're gonna start in 2 minutes, okay? Perfect guys. We're gonna start, okay? So please remember that you have available the chat. So if you have any questions, please let me know, okay? For today, we have other four topics, okay? So let me see. Today we will see network protection, site-to-site connections, authentication, and web protection. Okay, so we're gonna start about the network protection. Sorry, let me see. Okay, network protection. Here, um, the intrusion prevention in Sophos Firewall consists of three parts. Okay, the intrusion prevention system policies or APS that apply to firewall rules to protect against vulnerabilities in malformed traffic, for example. Other that is counterfeit protection, which removes traffic that tries to pretend to come from a different MAC or IP address to bypass the protection. And denied of service or DOS protection, which removes traffic that maliciously tries to prevent legitimate traffic from accessing services. About the APS policies are a collection of rules of for detecting malicious, okay, malformed data that can be exploited by the computers and servers. These APS policies are selected in firewall rules so they can be used to protect against attacks on traffic entering the network and traffic for compromised computers on the network. Before you can configure and use the intrusion prevention, you must enable APS protection. So this will download the APS signatures to Sophos firewalls. Once the signatures are downloaded, they will be kept up to date, okay? If the APS is disabled through the switch, the APS signatures will be deleted after 30 days unless enabled again, okay? The Sophos firewall include several predefined APS policies, okay, which can be found in protection. You have to go to protection or to protect, intrusion prevention, here as you can see in the screen, and then IP policies. These policies cover most of the everyday scenarios you would encounter in an average network. You can edit the included policies or create new ones to meet your security needs. When you create a new policy, APS policy, you assign it a name, okay? The first step, assigning a name limited to 15 characters and a description, okay? So you can then optionally select to clone the rules of an existing policy. This can save a lot of time when creating new policies, and you must have the policies at this point so that if you have select the clone rules, they can be added. Okay, you can then edit the policy. Do you want? If do you prefer? The policy consists of an ordered list of rules. So each rule contains one or more signatures and has one action. You can change the order of rules within the policy by drawing and dropping them, okay? When you add or edit a rule, you can quickly and easily select desired APS patterns by category, by severity, by platform, and target type. With support for persistent smart filter lists that will automatically update as new patterns matching the selected criteria are added. For example, you can use a small filter to select all signatures related a specific application. So you can choose to include all signatures returned by the filters or only selected signatures. Note that if you choose only selected signatures, the rule cannot update automatically included rule signatures. Okay, so the firewall includes the Talos commercial IPS signatures library from Cisco. Okay, so the Talos has additional signatures as required to ensure optimal intrusion prevention. Okay, it's a highly respected network security analysis group working around the clock to respond to the latest trends in hacking, insertions, and malware, just like our own Sophos Labs. So this is a great partnership that bolsters our APS protection and provides more granular APS policy controls. At the bottom of the rule, you can select the action you want to perform. So one of these actions is recommended. You will notice here that each signature has a recommended action associated with that can be used, or you can override it with the action, apply it to the policy, to the rule. Sorry. Once you have created a PS policy, it must be selected in the firewall for it to be active. The firewall rule you select determines which traffic is checked, and the APS policy determines which checks are performed. In addition to the protection that can be configured in APS policies, there are the native services, okay, or DOS, and phishing protection service that can be enabled. Okay, so here um, we will start with a fake protection, okay, which has three protection modes that can be enabled per zone. The AP spoofing attacks, spoofing, these packets will be dropped if the source AP address does not match an entry on the firewall's routing table. The MAC filter packet will be dropped if the source or MAC address is not configured as a trusted MAC, and the AP MAC per filter will be dropped if the AP and the MAC do not match with any entry in the AP MAC trusted list. Okay, the MAC filtering cannot be enabled until at least one entry in added to the trusted MAC list. In addition to these three modes, there is the option to restrict unknown AP on trusted MAC with one option enabled. Any traffic from an unknown IP address on a trusted MAC address is deleted. Know that if the fake protection is misconfigured, it can be blocked in the Sophos Firewall. Okay, as you can see here, the IP spoofing, MAC filter, AP per filter. If the fake protection trusted MAC selection, you can add MAC address, okay, that can be used with the MAC filter. The MAC address can be associated with an IP addresses, which can be set to one, okay, DHCP or static. For a static IP address, you can enter multiple values. A denial of services or DOS attack is a method that hackers use to prevent or deny legitimate users access to a service. Okay, so the DOS are usually executed by sending many request packets to a target server, which floods the server's resources, making the system unusable. Their goal is not to steal the information, but disable or deprive device or network so that users no longer have access to the network services resources or the computers. All servers can handle the volume of traffic up to a maximum, below which they are disabled. So the attacker send a very high volume of redundant traffic, a system so that it cannot keep up with the ground traffic and allowed traffic, network traffic. The best way to protect against the DOS attack is to identify and block which redundant traffic. Here you can see the configuration for an SIM float attack. You can set the lowest packet rate per minute for each resource and destination, as well as burst rate for each source and destination in packets per second. Okay, as you can see here, let me see. You can see here. Okay, when the burst rate is crossed, the firewall treats it as an attack and provides protection against the DOS attacks by removing all excess package from the resource or destination. The firewall will continue to draw package until the attack subsides because the appliance applies threshold values per IP address. Only traffic from the resource or destinations will be deleted, and all other network traffic will continue to be processed normally, enabling advanced threat protection on Sophos Firewall. If you have compromised device on your network, the Advanced Threat Protection or ATP in Sophos Firewall can help, okay, to detect when you try to connect the internet. Here you can see three of the main features that has ATP. This is really important. Detect compromised devices on your network, block access to command and control servers, uses data from and enable servers on the Sophos firewall. The ATP is global configuration, okay, that monitors traffic and data from all services enabled in the firewall, including the DNS and web requests to detect and block access to command and control services. The ATP is configured through a simple policy in protect, okay, then advanced protection. ATP is enabled using the toggle slider at the top of the page, okay. So the policy itself is choose between only logging detection or logging and deleting the traffic. The ATP applies globally. So if you need to include a specific devices or networks, this can be done here. You can also choose include a specific threats. However, you or we recommend doing so only under the guidance of Sophos support. Okay? Here you can see the inspect untrust content that inspect traffic from untrusted resources or traffic going or going only to untrusted detections. Destinations, sorry. These options offer the best performance. And inspect all content is the other options that inspect all content to and from trust and untrust resources and destinations. While the difference between these two options is minimal, okay? In high traffic environments, it can be become significant. There is a widget for 8 TP alerts in Sophos Firewall Control Center. You can click for additional information if you need it. After clicking on the widget, you will see this page showing the detections, including IP address, host names, and threats. And you can click on the screen to the ATP report. So you can access the ATP report in the network and threats, and then reports. Here you can see where the requests are coming from and where we're going, which users made the request, and what action was taken registration, or and release. Okay. Getting started with the security herbit. This is really important. Okay, the security herbit. Remember. So about the security herbit, please pay attention to these four features. This appears on the test. Okay. So the security herbit provides intelligent communication between endpoints managed in Sophos Central and Sophos Firewall, so they can coordinate their response to threats. The computer sends a regular small bit to Sophos Firewall to identify itself and show that it is still active and protected. When an event such as malware detection occurs, information about the event is shared in the firewall. The computer announces its health status to the firewall, which can be green, yellow, or red. Okay, these three colors. The software firewalls detects an advanced attack. It can request additional details from the endpoint, such as the process name, for example, and the firewall can use the endpoint herbit and status information to control access to host and network. Please pay attention to these four features. About the security herbit, what Sophos Firewall provides us. Okay? About the security herbit status. Here you can see which are the security herbit state means. If a computer has a green status, it means that the endpoint agent is running, so the computer is protected, and no active or inactive malware or POAs or potential wanted application has been detected. If the computer has a yellow state, the endpoint agent is running, so the computer is still protected, but inactive malware or potential wanted applications has been detected, and it may also indicate that the endpoint agent is out of date. Okay, this is really important because it appears on the test. When a computer has a red status, it may indicate that the endpoint agent may not be running, so the computer may not be protected. Alternatively, if cloud means that active or uncleaned malware has been detected, malicious traffic has been detected, or communication with a known malicious host. Okay, so for Central, negotiate trust between the computers. It's managed and the Sophos firewall registered with it. The central will provide the necessary certificates to computers and firewalls to be able to communicate. The computer will initiate a connection to the firewall, and if a computer manage be the name Sophos central account, a two-way communication channels will be established. Okay, so note that the security herbit is only supported when computers are connected to the local network or the firewall through a VPN, and is not supported in the WAN zone. Okay? As you can see here. Let's see what will happen if a malware is detected on a computer with security herbit. When malware is detected on your computer, the security herbit will send an alert, okay, an event information, and its new kill status to Sophos Firewall. Sophos Firewall can prevent the compromised computers from connecting to other computers or servers, protecting them from potential infections. Okay, you can see here. Let me see. Okay, all the other environment, computer servers will be protected. Okay, the communication here with the the other infrastructure, the red, it's broken. Okay, so they will be protected. Once the support firewall, or sorry, the endpoint agent has cleaned the malware, the security hermit will send you for an update health status to the firewall, and the firewall can allow you to access hosts and networks normally. Okay, sorry. So in this example, the firewall can protect computers where traffic needs to pass through a firewall, but what about computers connected through a switch? This is where lateral movement protection comes into play, okay? So we're gonna see this scenario. Um, we're gonna see the same scenario, but this time look at the computers that are connected to the same network section as a laptop that has detected malware. Computers in this section of the network can communicate with each other without traffic passing through Sophos Firewall. In this scenario, when the firewall receives a red health status for a laptop B, is here in the center, okay, it shares laptop B MAC address with all the endpoints it has a hairbit with. The computers can use MAC address to remove computer traffic with red health status, and this is done by Sophos Central server and must be enabled in the Sophos Central. Okay, so currently only Windows and endpoints will delay traffic based on computers with a red status. It is important to know that because this depends on the other computers being able to use the MAC address of the computers with a red health status, it would not work if we replace the switch with a route. So far, we have only seen the red health status being triggered by something being detected on the endpoint, but the firewall can also inform the endpoint when it has detected something that requires the laptop to have a red status, health status, and this can be called home to a command and control server, or because the endpoint has triggered an AP rules. To start using the security habits, the firewall must be registered. It's the first step with the same Sophos central account that is used to manage protection on computers. The registration is completed in System. You have to go System, then Sophos Central, and you can register the firewall using a one-time password or the username and password of a central administrator. To create a one-time password in Sophos Central, go to the firewall management, manage firewalls, click on firewall, and then click join a firewall that is already configured. Enter the firewall serial number and click on copy OTP or one-time password and finish. In Sophos Firewall, choose to sign up with one-time password, then paste the code and click on register. As you can see here, click the serial number. Next, register using OTP um, code, and finish. Registered, and that's it. Okay. So once enabled, you can optionally configure for which zones you want to detect missing herbits. A missing herbit is a computer that has established a herbit in the past but no longer sends a herbit. This could indicate that the protection software has been disabled. Okay, so in the control center, you can see how many devices has established a herbit with a firewall and their secure and their current status. Okay, with the firewall registered in Sophos Central, the endpoints will be to establish an herbit. They will be a short delete before this happens while they download the required certificates. For the Sophos firewall to start controlling network access based on a computer's herbit states, you must enable the registrations, the restrictions in the firewall rules. So constraints can be configured for the source destination or both, and are configured to set a minimum required help status that is green, yellow, or unregistered. Optionally, you can require computers to have a herbit. This means that any device that does not run Sophos Central would not be able to meet the requirement, and this can be used to block unknown devices on the network. Note here that target restrictions cannot apply to computers in the one zone. Okay, so perfect. Let me see if there are any questions. Okay, in one question. Let me see. Yeah, this session is recording, so I'm gonna share with you the recording of the session when the training ends, okay? And some important documentation that you will need to make the the test that is really important, okay? Perfect. So if you don't have any other questions, we're gonna follow with the side-to-side connections. Let me see. Okay, so side-to-side connections. The firewall includes two main ways to connect side-to-side VPN and the remote Ethernet or network devices. How you choose to connect your sites will depend on the site's requirements. For example, at a small site that routes all traffic back to the head office may be a good fit for a red, saving on the need for a full Sophos firewall on site, whereas a large site that needs a Sophos firewall for web filtering and web server protection could be connected using a site-to-site VPN without the need for additional hardware. If we look at a high-level comparison of two connectivity options, there are some key differences. Okay, side-to-side VPN and the RED. The side-to-side VPN can be used to create an encrypted tunnel between two Sophos firewalls, or between a firewall and another device that support protocols. Having a firewall at the remote site also allows you to provide the same level of on-site security filtering without sending all traffic through the VPN. The RED or remote Ethernet devices are a small hardware device that are connected in branch office that can transparently extend the network between sites without layer 2 connections. The RED are not plug and play and do not require any technical experience to connect at remote sites. Okay, the RED tunneling technology can also be used to establish connections between the firewall without using additional hardware, and this can be used as an alternative to the other sport side-to-side VPN options. For side-to-side VPN connections, Sophos Firewall supports two protocols, okay, the SSL and APsec. The SSL VPNs are easy to set up, providing a fast and effective way to connect brand offices. The APsec, on the other hand, can be more secure if configured currently and provides more flexible routing option and support failover groups. It the IPsec can also be used to connect with third-party devices, but it can be more complex to configure. Okay, so please pay attention to the screen um, about this information. Okay, all VPNs that are created are automatically added to the VPN zone. This is a special zone that has no physical interfaces, and all VPN connections with our site-to-site or remote access are always in the same in this zone. Okay, so but you cannot add or remove any other type of interface. Although you cannot edit the interface membership for these zones, you can manage the device access options. The red connections are not included in the VPN zone and can be configured to be in any zone, providing a flexible alternative if you need to create a custom zone. About to configure the SSL site-to-site VPNs, these are implemented using a client-server configuration, where each end of the tunnel has a distinct role. Okay, so the client side will always initiate the connections to the server, and the server will always respond to the client request. This is different for IPsec, where typically either the endpoint can initiate a connection. Before you create any VPN, first make sure that the SSL VPN is enabled for the zones in which you want to use it. These will be the zones from which the VPN will connect to the firewall. For the site-to-site VPNs, this is most likely the one zone. The SSL VPNs are configured in the part configured and SSL VPNs, as you can see in the screen. And at the top of the left of the page is a link to the global SSL settings. You need to verify and configure them before you start creating VPNs. It is important to note that this setting applies to both site-to-site and remote access SSL VPNs. So this should be taken into account when making changes. The Sophos Firewall use different ports, okay, at the same as Sophos Central uses different ports by default. Okay, so the firewall use the port 8443 by default. If you are going to change these ports, you should do so before you start creating a VPN. Here you can configure network settings for SSL VPNs, including the subnet for AP leases and DNS servers and domain name. And you can also customize the cryptographic settings of the connection and choose whether to compress the traffic. The configuration of the VPN SSL side to side will be doed in 3 steps. The first step is to create the server connection. Okay, the firewall will act as a server SSL VPN. Clicking on Add, as you can see here, server, add a new server. The server connection is configured with a name and the local on remote network. You can also optionally set a static IP address for the client rather than an IP address for the address pool. Next, load the configuration file from the server connection. You can choose to encrypt the connection file so that it requires a password to import. And on the client of a firewall, clicking on that, a client section, here you will give the connection a name and load the configuration file. If necessary, you can override the hostname for the server firewall, and this can be a static or dynamic DNS name or an IP address, and you can also optionally define an HTTP proxy server. Here you can see a connection SSL site-to-site VPNs. The firewall will automatically create the required routes and the firewall rules, so that traffic can flow between the network defined in the connections. About the IPsec site-to-site VPNs. Sophos Firewall supports 2 types of IPsec VPNs, a route-based and a policy-based. With route-based VPNs, you create VPN connections between 2 firewalls. Then separately configure routing for the traffic you want to send over the connection. With the policy-based VPNs, you define the local and remote networks as part of the VPN connection, and routes will be created for these networks only. The advantage of route-based VPN is that you can make changes to the traffic being routed over the connection without having to edit, and therefore disconnect and reconnect the VPNs. Here, you will see some important information about the requirements. APsec VPNs require a matching set of algorithms and settings on both ends for a tunnel to be successfully created. On the firewall, these are configured in IPsec profiles. There are several pre-configured profiles that ship with the firewall, but these can be cloned and modified to meet your requirements, and this may be necessary to meet compliance criteria or to create VPN with third-party devices. When you create a route-based VPN, an X-frame tunnel interface is created on the firewall. This can be configured like any other interface, except if it is always in the VPN zone. You can create routes, not rules, and firewall rules in the same way, and you will support any other traffic. Let's look at how you can configure this. We will look at the configuration for one side of the tunnel. However, this will need to be done on both ends. The first step is to create a tunnel interface. Sorry. This is done by creating a new IPsec configuration. Choose tunnel interface. Okay. For the connection type. And you will notice that when you select the tunnel interface IP version, automatically change to dual. Okay. Because tunnel interface supports both the APv4 and APv6. One side of the connection must be configured to initiate the connections. The other can be configured to support or to response only, sorry. And in the encryption section, select the IPsec profile and the type of authentication you want to use, as you can see in the screen. So, in the gateway settings, here you have to select the local interface that will be used to create a VPN connection and enter the IP address for the firewall that will be on the other side. When configuring local and remote gateways, the local and remote networks are not specified for tunnel interface. However, you must set the address for the remote gateway. Unlike the IPsec VPNs, you cannot use a wildcard, sorry, for the remote gateway address, even if the tunnel interface is configured to response only. Once you have saved the IP connections, you will see that a new interface has been created for it. The interface will be bounded to the physical interface selected when the IPsec connection was created. The interface itself is configured in the same way as any other interface. However, you cannot configure the zone. The tunnel interface are always in the VPN zone. Okay, this is really important. And you must ensure that the tunnel interface at each end of the tunnel are on the same subnet. Once you have configured the tunnel interfaces, you can create the routes for traffic to use the VPN routing that can be configured using a static routes as a one policies path and dynamic routing. Okay, so now we will look at a policy-based VPN settings. This is a wizard that can be launched for the IPsec VPNs, site-to-site VPNs page, which can be used to create a policy-based VPN. The wizard will guide you through the steps needed to create a VPN, providing additional help and description for each file on the left. Okay, as you can see here in the video. So let's walk through the configuration created by the wizard. In the general settings, you can choose between IPv4 and the IPv6. And with our Sophos Firewall should only respond to VPN requests or try to initiate them. When you create a new VPN, you can also choose to have a firewall automatically create the firewall rules. Although this will be fairly general and need to be reviewed. In the encryption section, here select the VPN profile. Either one of the three profiles or one you create yourself. Select the authentication type, which can be a pre-shared key or RSA or digital certificate. Okay, these three options. The pre-shared keys are passphrase, passphrase, sorry, that is entered on both devices. This is generally a weakest type of authentications, mainly because the key left is usually short compared to the other option. The RSA keys are public private key pairs. The public key is copied from each device to the other device. This provides good security as the key left and is much longer and different keys are used for each device. As a bonus, you do not need to create a passphrase and you can simply copy and paste the keys. And the digital certifications are the most secure option, but they require extra effort to configure. Okay, they provide a public private cloud, sorry, private key pairs similar to the RSA keys, but are also signed by trusted certificates authorized have the longest keys left. In the gateway settings, you also will configure the interface that Sophos Firewall will use to the VPN and where it will connect. If the remote site has a dynamic IP address, a wildcard can be used. However, this also means that the firewall cannot initiate the connection as it does not know where to connect. The IPsec VPN can also have an ID, which can be based on DNS, the IP address, email address, or others. Finally, you need to define the networks, which networks will be enabled through the VPN, and that is the local networks that remote devices will be able to access and the remote networks that you expect to be able to access through the VPN. The XGS series devices support APsec acceleration, which offloads APsec encryption and decryption to the NPU. This is faster in terms of performance, but it is also offloading work from the CPU, freeing, freeing up cycles to work on other security processing functions. Here you can see that the most commonly used ciphers authentication combinations are supported, and only the DES, 3DES, 2-fish, and DM5 are not supported. Okay, you can see the screen. Oh, sorry. Let me see. Sorry, guys. Let me share again my screen. Sorry, guys. I'm sharing my screen again. So, I was talking about the APSEC acceleration. So, the APSEC acceleration, it's configured the console by using the system APSEC acceleration command to enable and disable the features you can see here. Console system APSEC acceleration disable. All the instructions from the console, and that's it. Okay. With acceleration enable, when a packet enters the kernel, it will continue to perform encapsulation, but it will not encrypt the package. The NPU detect the ESP. Okay, ESP header and perform encryption on the packet. The opposite will happen with the answer. The NPU will decrypt the packet and the kernel will remove the encapsulation. If you also have firewall acceleration enabled by offloading to flash path, the NPU will perform packet encapsulation and encryption. And this is the idea scenario. The opposite is true with APSEC acceleration and firewall acceleration disable, as the kernel will do both encapsulation and encryption. About the red devices or remote Ethernet devices of Sophos. The red devices appliance provide an easy way to securely connect remote sites to a central network by creating a layer 2 tunnel. Okay, so instantly the red appliance on site requires not configuration or technical knowledge. The network connections use a small hardware red device at the remote locations, and all configuration of the device is done locally in the Sophos Firewall. At the remote locale, the red requires one powered connection, obviously, a network connection, a DHCP server to provide an IP address, DNS server, and default gateway, and a TCP and UDP ports. 3400 open in the firewall. Okay, this port is really important. Okay, as you can see here in the screen, TCP 3400 and UDP 3410. Okay, so how can you implement a red? It's easy. You can configure red in the firewall. You must provide a publicly resolvable hostname to which the network will connect and the IP address and the net mask of the red interface that will be created in the firewall. It also enters the 15-character red ID, which is printed on a sticker on the base of the red. Okay, this is used to link the settings to the device. The firewall then sends the configuration to the cloud based provisioning the server. The network then connects to a remote office and obtains the IP address, DNS, server, and gateway from the local DHCP server. The red will connect to the server and with the ID, and the server gonna return the configurations to the red that needs to be connected to the firewall in the firewall that is locally. Okay. Finally, the network established a layer 2 tunnel to the Sophos firewall using the TCP port TD400 and the UDP port TD410, as you can see here. The red can be implemented in 3 modes. These modes are really important, guys, because the test has a lot about these modes and the difference between each mode. Okay, so please pay attention to this. What are the 3 modes? A standard unified, a standard split, and transport split. What is a standard unified? The standard unified, here the remote work is managed by the Sophos Firewall, with servers as the DHCP server and default gateway for all clients connecting over network. All traffic generated on the network, on the remote network, is sent over the network to the Sophos Firewall. Okay? Please pay attention to this. All is sent to sorry, all is sent and is used with the DHCP port and is sent over a network to the firewall. The standard split. The standard split continues here. The firewall continues to manage the remote network, acting as a DHCP server and a default gateway. Okay? So, however, in this configuration, only traffic to defined network is sent over the network to the firewall, and all the other traffic is sent directly to the internet. Okay? And the transparent split. Here the firewall does not or manage the remote network, but is a member of it. Okay, so the firewall obtains the IP address from the DHCP server running on the remote network, and only traffic to defined network is sent over the network to the firewall, and all the other traffic is sent directly to the internet. As this mode of the deployment does not require any redirection, and it is easy way to connect networks after an acquisition or similar. In the case of the standard split and transparent split deployment modes, the firewall does not provide any web filtering or other security to clients on the remote network. Please note that if you still need to create firewall rules for the computers connected to the remote network to be able to interact with computers on the central office network. Okay? The configuration required when deploying RED in the different modes, it's slightly different and is summarized in this table. Okay? So both standard modes have a similar setup. You can statically set the IP address for the RED interface, Sophos Central, and firewall, and optionally you can provide a DHCP for the remote side of the tunnel. Where it differs is that for a standard split, you need to define for which network traffic will be routed through the red tunnel, and all other traffic will be routed to the local internet gateway. The transparent mode is very different. In this case, the firewall network interface will get its IP address configuration from the DHCP on the remote side, the tunnel, because the firewall is not the default gateway for your network. You must provide more split configuration in addition to split networks, configure a DNS server for those network and split domains. Okay? There are two red sorry modules that we already have in Sophos as the Red 20 and as the Red 60. The Red hardware offers the option of dual power supplies for redundancy and an expansion slot that can be used on Wi-Fi or 4 gigabit. Okay. Here you can see a table comparing the 020 and the 060. There are singular. The number of uses can be used with the red models is unlimited, and the selected model is driven by maximum performance and other features. Thus, the red 20 is designed for small sites with a maximum throughput of to 2050 Mbps, while the red is ideal for larger sites and reach um, throughput of up to 8050 Mbps. Okay, both models have gigabit connections on both internal and external interfaces and have support SFP fiber. The 60 adds two WAN ports as well as two power over Ethernet ports and can supply We're gonna return in 10 minutes. Okay, guys? Thanks. If do you have any questions, please let me know in the chat. It's available, okay? Perfect, guys. We are back. So let me. Okay. We are back with authentication. Okay. So what about authentication in firewall? Leveraging the Sophos Firewall authentication capabilities or capabilities provides the opportunity to control access to the network resources, the filter websites, route traffic, control applications, and more. Okay, you can also get details reporting on user activity and identify the high risk users, for example. The authentications can be done locally on the Sophos firewall, although it is more commonly configured to use external authentication resources. You can add users to the Sophos firewall manually or import via an CSV, and this can be either users or administrators. Okay, the difference is that administrators have a profile associated with them that controls their administrative access to the Sophos firewall. The users can be manually assigned to a group and will inherit policy settings that can be overridden per user. Local authentication is best suited to smaller organizations that do not have an existing directory server or service in place on or when guest users need access in authentication enabled networks. The firewalls can also be configured to authenticate with external servers such as the Active Directory, Novelty Directory, Radius, Server, TechS, the LDAP, and others. Using the last LDAP or LDAPS, the firewall can authenticate using Open LDAP, Apple Directory, or any other standard LDAP directory. The firewall can be configured to authenticate administrators to the web console using Azure AD SSO, and you cannot currently use this to authenticate users with the firewall. If you want to authenticate users with the firewall using an Azure Active Directory as an external Active Directory authentication server, you need to use an Azure AD Directory service functionality. You can find a guide on settings this up in the Sophos community page, recommended reads, and know that the Azure Active Directory service is an additional charge service and it is not included with the Azure AD. Okay? The authentication can be used to provide granular controls to many of Sophos firewall functions. Here, if we use the buttons on the left, we will find more about the places and you can use authentication. Okay? So, within firewall rules, you can enable the option to match known users. Okay? And you can select the users and groups that you want to match on. This makes the firewall rule a user rule instead of a network rule. If the firewall is unable to match the user's identity, you can choose to enable the web authentication, which can then further fall back to displaying the captive portal. If the firewall rule is for business applications such as Office 365, you can choose the excluded the traffic from the data counting, which means that it will not account towards any quotas you have configured. The TLS description rules can be matched on user's identity. This allows you to customize description per user or group and allowing you to set a specific description rules and standards for a department, for example, the finance, the IT. SD1 policies, um, these policy rules allow you to select traffic based on various properties, including users and groups, to determine which gateway it should be routed to. The remote access VPNs allows you to control who you want to connect and log in to the network. First, the authentication source needs to be selected in authentication service, and and the users and groups need to be selected in the VPN configuration. With the web policies, you can create rules that apply to specific users and groups, and this allows you to build a single policy of rules, and you can then apply to traffic, to the web traffic. Okay? The wireless protection on Sophos Firewall supports WP8 or WAPA 2 and enterprise security that can use a radius authentication server to control access to the wireless network. You can protect access to web servers by forcing users to authenticate before the connection even reaches the destination server. This means the attackers cannot try to exploit a web server as they don't have access to it. The the user portal allows users to manage their own quarantine um, password, and internet usage, as well as the loaded VPN and authentication clients. Is This portal is accessed using the HTTPS to the IP address of the firewall. By default, the user portal is only available to clients connecting from the LAN zone, but it can also be able for the reasons. Please know that the port for the user portal can be changed in system, then in the administration, and then admin settings. Okay, and the web admin. Users can be configured as either a user or administrator. If they are an administrator, then they can log in to the web admin and manage the firewall based on the profile that is applied to their account. Okay. About some configurations, um, authentication servers and services on the firewall. The firewall can be configured to authenticate using external servers. This is um, beneficial if the organization already has a directory service in place. This will allow an organization to leverage the user information they already have. So Sophos Firewall support directory services such as I mentioned it before, Active Directory, Novel Directory, Radios, etc. Okay. To add an authentication server, you have to go to Configure, then Authentication, then Server, and Add. Enter a name, select a server type, and specify the settings. Click on Task Connection to to validate the user credentials and check the connection to the server. And use the link in the study notes to find out more about the servers. Okay? To use synchronized user identity and Active Directory authentication servers must be configured on the firewall. So we will use adding an Active Directory server as our first example. Okay? So in addition to the settings that configure the connectivity to the server, one or more search queries are required to define where the users are located. Once configured, the firewall can use the server to query user and resource information to the Windows domain network. The connection button will allow the firewall to perform a sample query against the AD server. In this example, the test connection shows that there is a connectivity with the AD server, as you can see here in green. Okay, when using an Active Directory as an authentication server, users will be created in Sophos Firewall as assigned to a group when the first successfully login. Okay, this is important. To use an Active Directory groups, use the import wizard before the user login, and they will be assigned to the associated Active Directory group. Please note that firewall groups cannot be nested. Okay, so select the base DN here from which groups will be imported. The base DN is the starting point for the search in the Active Directory domains. The list is populated from the search queries configured for the server, and the organizational units below Sophos.local are listed. One or more OOS can be selected, and the groups they contain will be shown in the Select Groups pane. The common policies such as surfing quota and access time can be selected and attached to the groups too. Okay. On completion of the wizard, the import groups are now shown in Sophos Firewall. When a user logs in, they will be automatically added to the firewall group that match their Active Directory group. Okay, this is a question of the test. What is the group that the users will be added? It's a group that match their Active Directory group. Please note that if the user is a member of multiple groups, they will be added to the first one that they match on the Sophos Firewall, the first one, okay? And the groups can be reordered as required, okay? By default, authentication for services is local. Once authentication servers have been added, this can be enabled for firewall, user portal, VPN, administrator, and SSL VPN. In the example, an Active Directory server named DC has been added for the firewall authentication. Enable the authentication servers are processed from top to the bottom and can be reordered by drawing and dropping the servers in the list. In the example, the Active Directory server is now the primary authentication method. To simplify the authentication or the configuration for services, you can optionally choose to set it to be the same as the firewall authentication so that it will mirror those settings and any change you make to it. For our second example, we will look at radios or remote authentication DL in user servers. This is a protocol that allows network devices such as routes to authenticate users against a database, and it is used with Sophos Firewall wireless protection. The passwords are encrypted using the radio's short secret. The radios also support accounting, okay, which is commonly used for billing and statistical purposes. For our second example, we will look at radios, okay, as you can see in the screen. The radios accounting can be configured on the firewall so that it can send accounting start and stop message to a radio server. This allows the radio server to track network usage for auditing and billing purposes. There are three main advantages to radio authentication. The real-time collection, it's one. Accounting data can be collected and stored as stored at a central location, and third-party products can be used to analyze radios accounting data to provide charge back performance and exception reports. Let's look at how radios accounting works. Okay, so when a user logs into the network and communicates with the firewall sends an accounting start request package to a configured radio server along with the user's login time. The radio server will then begin collecting accounting information for that user. When a user logs out from the domain, the Sophos Firewall will send an account stop request along with the user's logout time. At this point, the radio servers stop recording accounting information for that user. If the Sophos Firewall reboots or it's shut down, the accounting stop message is not sent. Sorry. Let me return. Here. It's not sent, okay? Oh, sorry, guys. Let me see. Something important here. The client that are supported for the radios accounted are Windows client, HTTP client, Linux client, Android, AOS, AOS HTTP client, Android HTTP client, and AP clients. Okay, this is really important. And the radius accounting can be very useful when working with third-party wireless controllers, as it provides a mechanism for logged on user details to be passed to the firewalls, allowing single sign-on and accurate reporting. To configure a radius, let me see something. Okay. To configure a radius with accounting, first configure the external radio servers in the firewall. By selecting radios as the server type, giving the server name, and entering the IP address to contact the server and the port that will be used to communicate with the radio server to authentication requests. Also, a shared secret to require the authentication request and the group name attribute must be entered. Okay, these steps will be or will configure a basic radio server. To enable the radios accounting, first enable the accounting, okay, checkbox. Enter the port that corresponds with accounting port selected to the radio server, and the radio server should then be added to the authentication server list for the required servers. As well as an Active Directory, the firewall also supports native LDAP servers for authentication. Traditionally, this works on plain text. With secure LDAP, um, that is known as LDAPS, the communications can be encrypted by two techniques: SSL/TLS over the port 6000, 6036. The port 636, and the start TTLS, which works over the standard DAP port of 389. Okay, the start TTLS uses the plain text port and will attempt to negotiate an encrypted connection. If this fails, then it will fall back to using plain text. This is LTLS enforces the use of an encrypted connection. A client certificate is used to establish a secure connection. This shows an example of a certificate that has been issued to firewall by the organization's Active Directory. Okay, a requirement of the certificate is that the enhanced key usage extension needs to include the server authentication. Okay, that is 1.3.6.1, and the object identifier that is known as OID. There are two methods that can be used to configure secure LDAP. The first is to sign a certificate for the Sophos Firewall using your trusted enterprise CA. To obtain a certificate signed by the enterprise CA, first create a certificate, okay? Sign a request on the Sophos Firewall and request a certificate from the enterprise CA. Then import the CA certificate and SF cert server certificate on the Sophos Firewall from the enterprise CA. Then select the SF cert certificate as the client certification for the secure LDAP server and then Sophos Firewall and the LDAP server can now communicate securely. This works because the LDAP server already trusts the enterprise CA server that has assigned the certificate for the firewall. By importing the CA certificate on the firewall, it can also validate and trust the certificate used by the LDAP server. This shows an example of a configured using request created on Sophos Firewall. Okay. The CSR can be downloaded the file or copied to the clipboard and then send to the CA. The second method that can be used to configure secure LDAP is a certificate signed by the Sophos Firewall CA. Okay? So, first create a certificate on the firewall signed by the internal CA. Then import the CA certificate from the enterprise CA into the firewall. Then import the certificate of the firewall internal CA into the LDAP server. Then you have to select the certificate created in the first step, the client certificate for the LDAP server on Sophos Firewall. And finally, Sophos Firewall and the LP server can now communicate securely. Okay? So in the example, you can see here the LDAP server has been configured with a client certificate. You can also choose whether the Sophos Firewall will validate the LDAP server's certificate. If you have import CA certificate as recommended in both approach described, then this should success if selected. About the Azure, this is really important. It's the most used. Azure AD. It says out on the Sophos Firewall. What do we have here? Give me a moment, guys. Okay, perfect. So what about the Azure? Sophos Firewall allows you to configure Azure AD. Single sign-on for administrators to log in to the web console. Using the Azure AD for the administrator logins allows administrator to have a single username, a password, okay? For all the systems, they need to access and provide a single place where you can manage administrator access. The Azure AD capabilities used for this integration are part of the three tier of Azure, and our implementation takes advantage of open EID connection and for optimal security. Okay, the configuration process can be broken down into 8 steps, most of which are completed in Azure. Okay, first one, start to creating an IP or app registration in Azure. Okay, this will provide a basis for the firewall to communicate with the Azure. Then in the app registration, create a client secret that Sophos Firewall will use to authenticate. Add an app role to the app registration. This will be used to manage the access. Then add an IP permissions to the app registration. These are the permissions required for the firewall to authenticate the users. Then assign the users to the app role on Sophos Firewall. Add an Azure ADSSO authentication server. Select the Azure AD authentication service as an authentication resource for the administrators. And finally, add a redirected URI to the app registrations on Azure so that users are redirected back to the firewalls once they have authentications. So look at each of these steps in a little more detail, okay? So the configuration is done in Azure, okay? And you start by creating a new app registration. Give the app registration a name and select the redirected URI type as web. You will add the redirect URI later. Okay, so the firewall can authenticate. You will need to create a new client secret. When you create the secret, you can only copy the value once. As soon as you navigate away from the page, you lose the ability to copy it. When you create the client secret, you can choose how login is valid for. We will recommend rotating the secret periodically for the security. Create an app role in the app registration. This role will be used to assign a role on the firewall. You can create multiple roles that will determine the rule the administrator logging in. Um, it it will get on the firewall, and you can assign one role to a user. You will need to add permissions, okay? So to the app registration, so that Sophos Firewall can retrieve the information required as part of the login process. In addition to the default user that read permissions and users that read that all and group read all, Microsoft Graph permissions as delegated permissions. Once you have added the permissions, use the grant admin consent button. Okay? If you do not do these steps, the administrators will have the additional step to grant the permissions when logging in. Assign administrators to the app role, so they are assigned to the correct permissions when they authenticate. The next step is configure the Sophos firewall. You need to add the Azure authentication server and configure if with the details from the app registration you create in Azure. You will need to enter the application client ID and directory or the tenant ID from the overview page of the app registration. You also need to enter the client secret created, and on this page you will find the web admin console URL, which will need to be added to the redirected URI in Azure. Further down in the page, you select the fallback user group, okay? This is a group that will be assigned to the user if they do not match any other group. You also create a mapping between the app role and created in Azure and the rules on Sophos Firewall. Enter the value from the rule you create in Azure and select the Sophos Firewall rule. Once the authentication server has been created, you need to create it as an authentication method for the firewall administrations. Okay? So back in the Azure, you need to add the redirected URI from the Azure AD as an O authentication server on the Sophos firewall to the app registrations. This is configured in the firewall. Login screen will change to give administrator the choice between using SSO or local credentials to log in. Okay? If they choose SSO, they will be redirected to the Azure login screen. Okay, so the firewall supports 5 main methods for authentication users. There are the hotspot, clientless users, single sign-on, authentication agent, and captive portal. In this order in which authentication is checked for users, Um, throughout the rest of this chapter, we will look at some of the most common, okay, forms of authentication in more detail, but only the most common. A hotspot is a portal that controls networks access to devices connections to the network. The hotspots are typically used to provide guest internet access in public areas. When you add an interface to a hotspot, all devices connected through that interface must authenticate through the hotspot. They support a full suite of protection features and authentication methods. You can redirect users to a captive portal on sign-in page where users must accept terms of usage or authenticate themselves using a generate password or voucher. Okay? The firewall has three types of users. One is the clientless users that do not authenticate using a user and password, but instead are identified purely by their IP address. These clientless users are always authenticated locally by the firewall. The guest users are given temporary network access usually to access the internet. They authenticate when a user and password that are generated by the firewalls and are always authenticated locally. And the standard users authenticate with a username and password. They can be authenticated locally by the firewall or using an external authentication service, servers such as the Active Directory. Okay? Typically, you will use a clientless users to control network access for servers or devices such as printers and void phones. Here you can see an example of two printers being added as a clientless users. You give the device a name, specify the IP address, and select which group they will be a member of. You will use the group in the firewall rules to then control the network access to the device have. The clientless users can also be added in bulk by specifying a range of IP addresses and selecting the group they will be a member of. You can edit the details for each IP address after adding them. You can create guest users either individually, okay? So shown here, there are two main options when creating a guest users. One, how long the credentials will be valid for, and two, and what area the time will start as soon as the user is added or when the user first logs in. Using the print option, you can print the credentials for multiple select users. This is useful if someone will be providing this to visitors when they ask for access to the guest Wi-Fi, for example. And all guest users are created with the same settings that can be managed in configured, then in authentication, and then in guest user settings. Here you can set the group that the users will be added to and the password complexity. Optionally, you can also integrate a firewall with an SMS gateway to allow guest users to register with their own access details. This can save significant time where there are large volumes of guest users, such as in hotels and airports. Example. Okay, the local users can also be added to the firewall, and the user types are one, a user. Okay, obviously, the users who are connected to the internet from being the firewall. Two, administrators, users who has access to the firewall updates and settings as defined in the administration policy, and policies can also be assigned, such as for internet access and VPN, to specified at the user level take precedence over those specific specified at the group level. Okay, so the synchronized user identifier leverage uh, the precedence of Sophos on the Windows endpoints to provide transparent user authentication with the firewall, but sharing the user's identity through the Herbit connections. This makes authentication seamless without having to deploy additional agents onto domain controllers. Designed users identity is enabled by default for all the Windows endpoints that establish a security habit with the Sophos Firewall. For synchronized user identified to work, you will need to have added an Active Directory authentication server, the firewall, and import the groups using the wizard. The Active Directory authentication server must be enabled as an authentication resource in the firewall. Only go to configure, then authentication, and then services. With this done, all the Windows endpoints with the Herbit Sophos firewall will be authenticated transparently. Okay? The synchronized user identify will work by default if the prerequisites are satisfied. However, if you want to disable it, this can be done via the console by creating the file um, that you can see here, content no use right. Okay, removing this file will be re-enable synchronized user ID again. However, you do need to restart the authentication service for this change to take effect. Now that we look at the difference between of users, we will look at the groups. Okay, so there are two types of groups, normal and clientless. Name on their respective user types. A group is a collection of users, as you know, with common policies that can be used to assign access resources. Examples of policies that can be applied to groups include surfing quotas, access time, network traffic, traffic shaping, and these are configured in the system and then in profiles. By default, the users will inherit their assigned group policies. To adjust an group's assigned policy, you have to select the policy from the list of available policies. While editing on creating a new group, you can also create a new policy directly from the group page if you want it, okay? When using an Active Directory as an authentication server, users will be created on the firewall are assigned to a group when they first successfully log in. Okay? So to use the Active Directory groups, use the import wizard and users will be assigned to their associated Active Directory group. Please note that the firewall groups cannot be nested, and if a user is a member of multiple groups, they will be added to the first one they match on the Sophos Firewall. This is a question of the exam, okay? If the user authentication is only required for web filtering, the firewall can use a proxy challenge to authenticate the Active Directory users with the NTLM or Kerberos, okay? Let's start by looking at what happens when an unknown user tries to visit a web page. There are two scenarios. The first one, for transparent web filtering, Sophos Firewall will redirect to a URL server by the firewall and send an HTTP out. Okay? Challenge to so that the browser responds with the credentials. And in the case of direct proxy mode, Sophos Firewall can respond with a proxy out challenge so that the browser responds with the user's credentials. In both cases, the user is recorded against the IP address for future transactions. Okay? In both. To use an Active Directory SSO, it must be enabled person on the device access page. With this option enabled, if you have an authentication server configured, the ED SSO will be tried before the captive portal is displayed. The web authentication tab combines the 8ED SSO configuration and the captive portal behavior appearance settings. The page is laid out to follow the authentication flow. Okay? Try to authenticate users using the NTLM, and if authentication fails, then display the captive portal with this configuration. In the firewall rules, the option to use web authentication for unknown users will try to authenticate the users using the NTLM based on the configuration you have selected, and then fell back to using the captive portal. The captive portal is a browser interface that requires users be in the firewall to authenticate when attempting to access a website. After authenticating, the user provides to the address of the firewall redirects the users to an, a specific URL. This shows the default appearance of the captive portal. Okay, of the captive portal using the port 8090. Okay, with the current configuration, once the user has logged in, another browser tab will open. Closing the page, choosing the successful login will cause the users to be signed out. Okay, so the behavior of the captive portal can be customized. For example, changing when a user is signing out. While there is an option, the never sign out a user's logged into the captive portal, this is not recommended. As shown, it is also possible to customize the appearance and content of the captive portal. For example, you can change the logo and customize buttons, text, and the new appearance can be provided before the change are applied. The Firewall Transparent Authentication Suite, or STAS, provides transparent SSO, okay, authentication for users without requiring an client on the endpoint. Sorry, guys, give me a moment, please. Okay, sorry, I'm back. Okay, so it employs an agent on the Microsoft Active Directory domain controller or a member server that monitors and stores authentication active and sends authentication information to the firewall. There must be an STAS installation serving all domain controllers to ensure that all logon events can be monitored. It is important to know that the STAS software only works with Microsoft Active Directory and only works with IPv4. Please note that this SSO client cannot be used with the STAS is enabled on the firewall. Okay? So let's have a look at how the STAS works. The user, for example here, Lucy Fox, logs into the domain on a computer that has the IP address 10.1.1.1. Okay? The domain controller writes the login details to the security event log with the ID 4768. This includes the IP address of the computer and the name of the users that log in. Okay? So the STAS monitors the events logs for the login event. Okay? When the login event is detected, when this is detected, the STAS records the domains. Okay? As STAS is monitoring the events logs, you need to ensure that successfully logged on events are being audited in the local security policy. The STAS notifies the firewall to the login and supplies the details recorded from the event log, and this is done on the port 6060. Okay? Then the firewall updates the live users, mapping the traffic from 10.1.1.1 to the user Lucy. Okay, that's how it works. To get a start with the CIS, to load the software from the web admin, configure, then authentication, then client to load. Okay, and install it. on all Active Directory domain controllers, or a member server for each domain controller. During the installation, you can choose to install just the collector or agent component of STAS or both. There may be benefits to install individual components in large and more complex environments. The SCAS also needs to be configured with a user that will be used to run the service. Okay? The user must have the right to log on as a service and must be able to monitor the secure event log. Okay, once installed, the SSL software needs to be configured on the General tab. Configure the domain as TAS, and that will monitor and log events for. Okay, the IP address of the Sophos Firewall needs to be able to the Sophos Appliance section of Select. Sorry, guys. The section of STAS. Okay, so the workstation pooling can be configured to use either WMA, this is the default option, or registry read access. This is used to determine the currently logged on user when a computer is not found in the live user state pool. Okay, this STAS can also be configured to detect when users log off, and this can be done using the same method, workstation polling or a pin. Once this is installed, um, this is enabled on the firewall, which is done in configured, then in authentication, and then in SCAS. You can configure how long Sophos Firewall will try to prove for the identity, and whether access should be limited while it tries to confirm the user's identity. For every server you install this STAS on, you must add the IP address as a controller. Okay? Sorry, a collector on the Sophos Firewall. If you are installing the full suite for each domain controller, you should put each controller in its own group. Using collector groups, it belongs the scope of this server. Okay. Other method for authenticating with the Sophos Firewall is used to use an agent on each endpoint. You can download an agent for Windows, Mac, Linux, and then need to install the agent and certificate on the computers. Um, the Chromebooks are increasingly popular in education as some corporate environments, but they create a unique set of challenge for user identification with the network firewalls. With the firewall provides a Chromebook extensions that shares Chromebook user ID with the firewalls to enable full users-based policy enforcement and reporting. The prerequisites include an on-premise Active Directory server, signed to Google G Suite, and the Chrome extension is pushed from the G Suite admin console, providing easy and seamless deployment data transparent to users. Okay. The Chromebook SSO must be enabled in configure authentication and services. To do this, it's necessary to provide your domain that is registered with the G Suite and the certificate used to communicate with the Chromebooks. Okay, the common name must match the network where the Chromebooks users are. Okay, so a couple of things to remember. You will need to enable the Chromebook SSO service in device access for the zones there where the devices are located. You will also need to create a firewall rule that allows the Chromebooks to access the Google IP and the Chrome Web Store. Okay, guys, give me a moment, please. I need to see something here. Sorry, guys, I'm back. Okay, so let me follow. Okay, so to configure the Chromebook app in the G Suite, you need to navigate to App Management and then search for an open Sophos Chromebook User ID app. Here you will need to upload the configurations as a JSON file that includes server address, port, and log settings. If the Sophos Firewall is using a self-signed certificate, you also need to upload the CI certificate, device management, then in networks, selecting the option, use the certificate, as an HTTPS certificate authority. Okay, enabling the multi-factor authenticator. The multi-factor authenticator means that two pieces of information are required to log in. Something you know, your password, and something you have, your token. Okay? So the firewall supports the multi-factor authenticator using one-time password. There are different types of one-time password. You can use either software tokens, such as Sophos Authenticator app or Sophos Intercept X apps that are available, for Android and iOS, or hardware tokens if they come to RFC example. Realize note, please note that the RSA tokens are not supported here. Okay, this is not supported here. Let's look at how one-time password works. In this diagram, we have the user with their token on the left and the firewall on the right. Okay, so the user has a token that contains, a key and gets the time from a synchronized clock. These are processed using the algorithm scripted to produce the token code. Okay? The Sophos firewall needs to have the same key and be synchronized to the same clock so that when it calculates the token code, it comes out with the same number. Okay? So to allow for variations in the time between the token and the firewall, it will accept the previous and next token code as valid by default. This is the token offset step and can be changed in the settings. The multi-factor authenticator is not enabled by default and must be turned on. Okay, this can be done for either all users or a selected set of users or groups. Okay, and to add a token, you simply need to specify the secret, which is 32 to 120 character, hexadecimals, a script, and select which user to sign to token to. Optionally, the global time step can be override, which may be necessary if you are using a mixture of tokens. Okay, this is an example of how to generate a password on the Sophos Authenticator app. You can scan a QR that manually or wherever you prefer. Here you can see a token for training users that we will use the consider two scenarios. In the first scenario, the user has their token, but the login is failing. This may be caused if the time of the token and the firewall are out of sync. To resolve this, you can either enter the current code, passcode, into the firewall, and it can compensate for the time difference. In the second scenario, the user is not the root, but has dropped and broken the mobile phone that has the Sophos Authenticator app on it, and they need to access to the SSL VPN, but it's secured using the OTP or one-time password. If this happens, you can add additional codes to the token. These are a set of single-use codes that include automatically be removed after they are used. They should have to be set or sent to the user in same fashion. Okay, Perfor, perforal, sorry, preferably through a secure channel after they have been created. These codes will persist until they are used on an administrator remove them. Okay, so perfect, guys. So to end this session, we have the web protection topic. I will try to be as short as possible with this topic, okay? So, the web protection can be used to defend against malware and control users' behavior. The firewall can scan for malicious content using two virus engines, a Sophos and a Vera, okay? And if additional checking is required, it can leverage zero-day protection, a Sophos cloud-based sandbox solution. In addition to malicious content, you can also choose to block potentially unwanted applications from being downloaded onto your network. And you can improve your network security by blocking access to the risky websites and applying controls for users' browsing behavior. Okay? The web filtering on a firewall can be done either transparently, intercepting traffic as it passes, or as an explicit proxy, where clients are configured to use the firewall as their web proxy. The DPI, or the Deep Packet Inspection Engine, can perform web filtering provided, for improved performance. However, you can still choose to use the legacy web proxy. Let's take a look at some difference between the DPI and the web proxy filtering. DPI implements proxyless filtering handled by the ESP, or the Intrusion Prevention System engine. It provides port agnostic protocol detection and supports the partial or full offload of traffic flows to the network fastpath. It can decrypt all the scan TLS 1.3 traffic and offload the traffic trusted by the Sophos lab. Okay? In comparison, you may want to use the web proxy filtering to enforce the safe search or your two restrictions, or because your clients are, I don't know, configured to use the Sophos Firewall as an explicit proxy. Okay, let's take a closer look at how the traffic is processed in each of these scenarios. The security features section of the firewall rules provide a section or the settings to choose between the DPI engine and the proxy, web proxy for each individual rules. If the Sophos firewall is the network gateway or will be replacing an existing gateway, then the web filtering can simplify by enabled on the traffic passing through it. Okay, this deployment is ideal as all traffic must pass through the firewall before being allowed out to the internet. As such, all traffic, back, all traffic entering the network must also pass through the firewall before reaching the clients. By implementing in this scenario, all web traffic can be scanned, decrypted, sent to zero-day protection if needed, and controlled so that users cannot violate company policies and hackers cannot pass unseen. Example, in the scenarios where the firewall would not be primary network gateway, there are two deployment options, okay? The first one is to add the firewall to the network in a bridge mode, allowing to transparently filter the web traffic. This is a good solution if the existing edge device will not be replaced similarly, okay? To the previous solutions, anyone being the firewall, so the firewalls will not be able to bypass the filtered and will have their traffic inspected. The only exception would be if there were another network, such as the DMZ hosting public servers or being the edge firewall. The other options, it's for the Sophos Firewall to be on the network but knowing the direct flow or traffic, and to have the client configuration or configured to use the, as an explicit proxy. Okay? In this configuration, the firewall does not have any control over traffic. That is sent directly to the default gateway, and so it is important that each device is configured to only allow web traffic from allowed devices, including the Sophos firewall. Okay? This is something important to know. The key difference between transparent and explicit proxy web filtering are in a transparent and an explicit. In a transparent proxy, the configuration, the proxy is typically deployed at the internet gateway, and the proxy service is configured to intercept traffic for a specific port. The client is unaware that traffic is being processed by a proxy. For example, a transparent HTTP proxy is configured to intercept all traffic on port 80 for 443. This provides a standard enterprise configuration where all clients routed to the internet will be filtered and protected, no matter what the end users do or change on their machines. An added benefit is a reduction of client proxy configurations troubleshooting. The transparent proxies also handle mobile and guest devices without any additional configuration. And explicit proxy configurations, here the client is explicitly configured to use a proxy server, meaning the client knows that all requests will do through through a proxy. The client is given the host name, IP address, and port of the proxy service. When a user makes a request, the client connects to the proxy service and sends the request. The disadvantage of the explicit proxy is that each client must be properly configured to use the proxy. Okay, so how can we configure the web protection? The web policy can be used to control end users' browsing activities. The policies include options for safe search, which prevents potentially inappropriate image, videos, and text from appearing in Google, Yahoo, or Bing search results. Due to restrictions which prevent access to um, potentially inappropriate content by restricting YouTube search results, and time quotas that allows access to restrict websites such as only shopping for a limit period. The policies include rules which are used to define type of usage to restrict. This can include user activities, categories, URL groups, file types, and dynamic categories, and specify content filters to restrict web content that includes any terms in the list, and define the action to take when the firewall counters HTTP traffic that matches the rule criteria. This is shown an example of a web policy. Okay, So it has an ordered list of rules and a default action, in this case, allow it, and determines the behavior of the traffic does not match any of the rules. Each policy rule applies to either specific users and groups or anyone. You define the activities or types of web traffic that are going to be controlled by the rule and can optionally also apply a keyword content filter on the traffic. Beyond the web policy rules are further options, some of which require a web proxy to be enforced. These are indicated with a notice. If these options are selected and used with the DPI engine, they will not be enforced. The available options are the enforced, the safe search in common search engines. This is done by modifying the request to enable the features in the engine and requires decrypting the web traffic. Enforce you two restrictions, which is done in the same way as in foreign safe search, and configure how much quota time users have per day. Advanced settings allow you to include this policy, logs and reports, prevents the the downloading of files greater than the site specified at X forward for a header to pass on the IP address of the original HTTP request, allow users to sign into Google Apps such as Gmail and Drive only with the domains specified, and apply Microsoft Azure ED tenant restrictions. Again, a notice indicates with settings required the proxy to be enforced. The web categories that are what most people think of when they think on the web filtering. The firewall comes with over 90 predefined web categories, which you can reclassify and apply traffic shaping policies to. You can also create customized web categories based on either local list of domains and keywords or an external URL database. Okay, so the external URL database can be from either HTTP or FTP server. The database should be in one of the following formats: that that start, that GI, TXT, for example, and the database will be checked every 2 hours for updates. The URL groups are used to create a matched list of domains for which the default configuration should not be applied. All subdomains for the entire domains will also be matched. There are a couple of important default groups. The local TLS exclusion list, which you can use to manage domains you do not want to decrypt traffic for. And the damaged TLS exclusions list, which is a Sophos managed list of domains that are included from the LS encryption. On this page, you can see the domains that are included, although you cannot edit or delete this group. Okay? Sophos Firewall can manage access to these files through the web policy and comes with several groups of common file types defined by the extension and MIME type. Well, the web policy, if there are an options that cannot be enforced, this will be indicated in the firewall rule with a warning triangle. Hovering over the warning will provide additional information. When any web filtering is enabled, Sophos automatically block websites that are identified as containing which sexual abuse content by the Internet Watch Foundation. No policy or exclusions can be configured to allow these sites, okay? And the domain names will be hidden in the logs and reports. There are several protection settings that can be managed in web and then in general settings, including the selecting between single and dual engine scan, the scan mode, and the actions to take for unescapable content and potentially unwanted applications. The HTTPS encryption and scanning settings on this page allows you to change the signing C8 and modify the scanning behavior for the legacy web proxy. These settings do not affect the TLS decryption rules. The global zero-day protection configuring in the protection, then in zero-day protection and protection settings. Here you can specify whether an Asia Pacific, Europe, or US data center will be used or let Sophos decide where to send files for analyze based on which will give the best performance. And you may need to configure this to remain compliant with data protection laws. Okay? In general settings tab, there are also some advanced settings where you can enable web caching and caching Sophos endpoint updates. You can also configure some web proxy settings. For example, the port that client should use to configure the firewall as a explicit proxy, the ports that can be connected to, and the minimum TLS version. The firewall can be configured to cache web content, which can save the bandwidth for sites with limited or slower internet access. However, the web proxy is required in order to enforce this. Okay, this is important. About the user notifications, you can modify the image and text shown on the warn and blocks page. The text can include variables to display the category detected and to click to suggesting a different category. The web policy overrides settings allow authorized users to override blocked sites on users' devices, temporary allowing access. You define which users, okay? For example, this could be teachers in educational settings, have the option to authorize policy overrides. Those users can then create their own override codes in the firewall user portal and define rules about which sites they can be used for. Okay? Override code rules can be broad, allowing any traffic or all categories, or more narrow, allowing more individual sites or domains, and can also be limited by time and date too. And to avoid abuse, codes can easily be changed or canceled. Codes can be shared with end users who enter them directly into the blog page to allows access to blocked sites. The exceptions found within the web protection, the firewall, can be used to bypass certain security checks or actions for any sites that match criteria specified in the exception. There are a few predefined exceptions already in the firewall, and more can be created at the administrator description. Okay, this is important to note that exceptions apply to all web protection policies, no matter where they are applied in the firewall. The exceptions can be matched on any combination of URL patterns, website categories, source IP address, and destination IP addresses. And to end with this chapter, a little bit about the traffic shaping. Sophos cannot control web access in three ways. Using, sorry, Sophos can control access in three ways. Um, Using the quota action in the web policy rules, applying sovereign quotas to groups of users, and applying the traffic shaping policies. Okay? In the web policy, you can set rules to apply a quota action. This will apply to all activities in that rule. Okay? So further down in the policy, you can configure how much quota time users have per day. All quota activities serve the same pool of quota time. When a user access accesses an activity with a quota, they are asked how much quota time to use now. This is to prevent quota time being exhausted by websites updating in the background. The sovereign quotas are applied to users and groups and are another way to control the amount of time spent on the internet. Unlike web policy rule quotas, sovereign quotas apply to all internet traffic. The traffic shaping does not limit the amount of time of data. Instead, it can either limit or guarantee how much bandwidth will be available. So the firewall supports traffic shaping for several types of policy. In this context, the traffic shaping should be would be applied to web categories, but can be applied to users and groups, firewall rules, and applications. The example shows a new category that has been created for www.example.com and has the traffic shaping policy applied. For example, many applications and tools used for day-to-day business are provided through a cloud-based services. So ensuring good internet connectivity to employees is vital. Alongside these, business applications are very other type of applications and services that can be imagined, many of which are unproductive or can expose users and the company network to risk. The firewall can protect against risky applications and either block or limit access to unproductive applications and at the same time guarantee that the business applications have the bandwidth they need. The firewalls comes definitions for thousands of known applications which you can filter and view the details on protect, then on applications and application list. Okay? The applications filters are a set of rules that can allow or deny access to applications. Uh, Unlike web applications, filter rules are not applied to users groups. So um, the web filter applies to all users for the firewall. And applications filters are created in two states. First, create application filter. Here you can optionally select an existing application filter as a template, and you save the application file. And if you select a template, the rule will be copied over the new filter. Okay, guys, let me see something. Okay, so guys, I think that's it for today. We saw different topics, and the next training it's in the next Tuesday. Yeah, the next Tuesday, same time. Please remember, same time. I will share with you the recording of the session, and in the next training, we'll see more about the application filter rules. Okay, that is really important. So, thanks, guys, for joining today. I hope you have a good weekend and a good day. And please, if you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, bye bye, guys.